The distant wail of a baby cut through the morning stillness, followed quickly by another, then another, until the small ranch house on the outskirts of Bentonville, Wyoming Territory echoed with the desperate cries of 4 infants. Nathan Ambrose stared down at his hands, calloused from years of roping cattle and mending fences, hands that now felt utterly useless against the tide of grief and responsibility that threatened to drown him. It had been 3 weeks since Sarah, his wife of 6 years, had died giving birth to their twins. 3 weeks of stumbling through days and nights with their newborns and their 2-year-old twin daughters. 3 weeks of neighbors' well-meaning but temporary help. 3 weeks of wondering how in God's name he was supposed to keep 5 people alive when he could barely keep himself from breaking down. The year was 1878, and Bentonville was little more than a scattered collection of buildings amid the vast Wyoming prairie, a general store, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, a small church, and several homesteads spread across the territory. The railroad had come through 2 years prior, bringing with it the promise of prosperity and growth, but Nathan felt no connection to such promises now. His world had contracted to the walls of his modest home and the 4 small lives that depended on him. "Hush now, Lily," he murmured, lifting the older of the twin toddlers into his arms. Her sister, Lucy, clung to his pant leg, her cheeks tear-stained and grimy. In the makeshift cradle nearby, the newborn twins boys he'd named Thomas and James continued their hungry cries. "I know, little ones," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "I know you want your mama." He placed Lily beside her sister on a blanket on the floor and turned his attention to preparing milk for the infants. The cow had been milked earlier, and the neighbor woman, Mrs. Peterson, had shown him how to dilute it properly for the babies. His hands trembled as he worked. The exhaustion was bone deep, a weariness that sleep couldn't cure, not that he got much of that anyway. The twins had been born early, small but with strong lungs. The local doctor had done all he could for Sarah, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Nathan had held her hand as she slipped away, her final words a plea for him to love their children enough for both of them. Some days, like today, he wasn't sure if he could love anyone at all. The pain was too raw, too consuming. "Damn it all," he muttered as he spilled some of the precious milk on the rough wooden table. The baby's cries intensified, and Lily began to wail in response. Lucy remained oddly silent, her small features a miniature version of her mother's, watching him with eyes too knowing for a child her age. A knock at the door startled him. Probably Mrs. Peterson again, or perhaps the pastor's wife with another casserole he would barely taste. They meant well, but their pitying glances only deepened his shame. A man should be able to care for his family. "Coming," he called, wiping his hands on his already soiled shirt. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides and pulled it open, the words of gratitude he'd prepared dying on his lips. It wasn't Mrs. Peterson or the pastor's wife. Standing on his porch was a woman he'd never seen before. Her dress was simple but clean, her light brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, with tendrils escaping to frame a face that was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain, but somehow arresting. In her hands she held a loaf of bread, the steam still rising from the crust. "I heard there might be a need," she said simply. Her voice was low and melodious, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "I'm Cassandra Jacobson. Most folks call me Cass." Nathan stared at her, unable to form a coherent thought. Behind him, the babies continued to cry, and he saw her eyes shift past him to the chaos inside. "Mr. Ambrose," she prompted. "How did you know my name?" he finally managed. A slight smile touched her lips. "It's a small town, Mr. Ambrose. News travels, especially when it's the sad kind." He should have invited her in or thanked her for the bread or asked her business. Instead, what came out was, "I don't know what I'm doing." Something in her expression softened. Few new parents do. Fewer still with 4 little ones and no partner. She held out the bread. "May I come in? This isn't all I brought." Nathan stepped back, allowing her to enter. Only then did he notice the large basket hanging from her arm, covered with a cloth. Cass moved into the house with purpose, placing the bread and basket on the table. She removed her shawl and hung it neatly by the door, then turned to survey the scene with calm, assessing eyes. "The little girls need washing and fresh clothes," she said matter-of-factly. "And you need to finish preparing that milk for the babies before they wear themselves out crying." She knelt beside the toddlers. "Hello there, sweethearts. My name is Cass. Would you like to get cleaned up?" Lucy shrank back, but Lily, always the bolder of the two, reached out a curious hand to touch Cass's cheek. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, finding his voice again. "I mean, I know your name, but are you new in town?" Cass smiled up at him as she gently took Lily's small hand in hers. "Yes and no. I grew up about 20 miles from here, but I've been away for many years. Just returned last week to stay with my Aunt Mrs. Wilson while I decide what comes next." She nodded toward the milk. "Those boys are waiting, Mr. Ambrose." There was something in her tone not commanding, but expectant that spurred him to action. He turned back to the milk preparation, aware of her moving around behind him, speaking softly to the girls, somehow already gaining their trust. By the time he had the bottles ready improvised from medicine droppers, the doctor had left. Cass had both toddlers sitting in a small wooden tub, giggling as she washed their hair. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was as sudden as it was unexplainable. "Here," she said, rising and drying her hands on her apron. "Let me take one of them while you feed the other." Without waiting for permission, she lifted Thomas from the cradle and settled into the rocking chair by the hearth, cradling him with the confidence of experience. Nathan hesitated only a moment before picking up James and sitting opposite her. He watched in wonder as she handled the fussing infant with gentle efficiency. "You've done this before," he observed. "I helped raise my younger siblings," she replied, not looking up from the baby. 5 of them. Our mother died when the youngest was just born." "I'm sorry," Nathan said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Cass met his eyes then. "It was a long time ago, but it means I understand something of what you're facing." She adjusted Thomas in her arms. "Though I had my father and older sister to help, you're doing this alone." "Not very well," he admitted. "Better than you think," she countered. "They're alive, aren't they? And clearly loved." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest at her words, the first words of genuine encouragement he'd heard since Sarah died. Not pity or empty platitudes, but recognition of his efforts, however inadequate they felt. "My aunt mentioned you might need help," Cass continued. "I'm looking for work and she suggested I call on you." "Work?" Nathan repeated, confused. "You mean as a housekeeper?" "As whatever you need," Cass replied simply. "Nursemaid, housekeeper, cook. I'm capable at all 3. Nathan stared at her, trying to process what she was offering. "I can't afford to hire help. The ranch barely turns a profit in good years." "I'm not asking for much," she said. "Room and board and whatever small wage you can manage. In return, I'll help with the children in the house." She paused, looking around. "From what I can see, you could use the help, Mr. Ambrose." It was true. He was drowning, and they both knew it. But to bring a stranger into his home, to admit defeat so completely— "What about your plans? You said you were deciding what comes next." A shadow passed over her face. "Sometimes life makes those decisions for us. I need somewhere to be useful for now." She smiled down at Thomas, who had quieted in her arms. "Besides, I've always loved children." Nathan looked around at his home, at the unwashed dishes piled in the basin, the dirty laundry spilling from a basket in the corner, the toddlers who were now splashing happily in their bath. He thought of the endless nights of broken sleep, of trying to work the ranch while caring for 4 children, of the crushing weight of his grief and responsibility. "Just until I get on my feet," he said finally. "Just until I figure things out." Cass nodded, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Of course, Mr. Ambrose. Just until then." After the babies were fed and the girls dried and dressed, Cass opened her basket to reveal a stew she'd prepared, still warm in its pot, and a small jar of apple preserves. "Eat," she instructed Nathan, serving him a generous portion. "When did you last have a proper meal?" He couldn't remember. He'd been surviving on coffee and whatever the neighbors brought, often forgetting to eat altogether. The stew was rich and flavorful, with chunks of beef and vegetables in a thick gravy. Nathan hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first bite touched his tongue. He ate ravenously while Cass tended to the girls, cutting small pieces of the fresh bread she'd brought and spreading them with butter and a touch of the preserves. "The bread is wonderful," he said between bites. Did you bake it?" "This morning," she confirmed. "My aunt says I have a gift for bread making. It's a small talent, but a useful one." "Nothing small about it from where I'm sitting," Nathan said with the first genuine smile he'd managed in weeks. After the meal, while Nathan put the girls down for their afternoon nap, Cass moved through the house like a quiet whirlwind. She washed dishes, swept floors, gathered laundry, and somehow managed to bring order to the chaos that had reigned since Sarah's death. By the time the babies needed feeding again, the house was transformed. "Where will you sleep?" Nathan asked suddenly, realizing he hadn't considered the practical details. "There's a small room off the kitchen, isn't there?" Cass asked. "My aunt mentioned it." Nathan nodded. It was little more than a storage space, with a narrow window and barely enough room for a cot. "It's not much." "It will be perfect," Cass assured him. "I don't need much space." That night, for the first time in weeks, Nathan slept deeply, knowing that someone else was there to hear the babies if they cried. When he woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window, he was momentarily disoriented by the silence. Panic surged through him as he threw off the covers and hurried from his bedroom. The sight that greeted him in the main room stopped him in his tracks. Cass sat in the rocking chair by the hearth, a baby in each arm, singing softly. On a blanket at her feet, Lily and Lucy played with wooden spoons and a few small toys that Cass must have brought with her. The air smelled of coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. "Good morning," Cass said, looking up. "The boys have been fed and the girls have had breakfast. There's coffee on the stove and biscuits nearly ready." Nathan ran a hand through his disheveled hair, suddenly conscious of his rumpled appearance. "You should have woken me." "You needed the sleep," she replied simply. "And we managed just fine, didn't we, little ones?" She smiled down at the babies in her arms. Over the following weeks, Cass proved herself invaluable. She established routines for the children, kept the house in order, and prepared meals that reminded Nathan what food was supposed to taste like. She did laundry, mended clothes, and somehow found time to plant a small vegetable garden beside the house. Nathan, freed from the constant demands of childcare, was able to return his attention to the ranch. The cattle needed tending, fences required mending, and there was always work to be done in the barn. He hired a local boy, Ethan, to help with the heavier tasks, paying him with a share of the eventual profits and occasional meals that Cass generously provided. Each evening, Nathan would return to the house to find it warm, clean, and filled with the sounds of his children no longer just crying, but cooing, giggling, and, in the case of the toddlers, chattering away to Cass as they followed her about her tasks. "Pa home," Lily would exclaim, running to him on unsteady legs. Lucy, still the quieter of the two, would watch from a safer distance until he knelt and opened his arms to her as well. It was a strange kind of healing, this new routine. The pain of Sarah's absence never truly faded, but it changed, became something he could carry without being crushed beneath it. One evening in late June, nearly 2 months after Cass had arrived, Nathan found her on the porch after the children were asleep. She sat on the wooden bench, her hands still for once, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "May I join you?" he asked. She moved over slightly, making room for him on the bench. "It's a beautiful evening." "It is," he agreed, settling beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the colors deepen and fade as the sun dipped below the horizon. "The boys are growing so fast," Cass commented. "Thomas nearly rolled over today. James won't be far behind." Nathan nodded, a mix of pride and melancholy washing over him. Sarah would have loved to see that. It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name aloud in Cass's presence. He wasn't sure why he'd avoided it, perhaps fearing that acknowledging her absence would somehow make this new arrangement with Cass feel like a betrayal. "Tell me about her," Cass said softly. If you'd like to, that is. Nathan was surprised by the request. Most people avoided mentioning Sarah, unsure of how to navigate his grief. She was strong, he began slowly, stronger than she looked. When we first came out here from Pennsylvania, everyone said a city girl like her wouldn't last a season. But she proved them all wrong. He smiled at the memory. She learned to ride, to shoot, to garden in soil, nothing like what she was used to back east. She never complained, even when I know she must have been homesick for her family. How did you meet? Cass asked. Her father owned the bank where I worked as a clerk in Philadelphia. I was saving to head west to have my own spread someday. She used to bring him lunch, and we'd talk while she waited for him. Nathan chuckled. Her father nearly had a fit when she announced she was marrying a penniless clerk with dreams of being a rancher. But he came around? Eventually, after the twins were born, Lily and Lucy, I mean. He came out to visit once, saw what we'd built here. He was proud of her, I think. Proud of us. And then the boys came along, Cass prompted gently when he fell silent. Nathan nodded, his throat tight. We were so happy when we found out. Sarah always wanted a big family. But the pregnancy was harder this time. The doctor warned there might be complications. He trailed off, unable to continue. Cass didn't push, just sat quietly beside him as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. I think she would be grateful, Cass said after a while, to know that her children are loved and cared for, that they're thriving. Because of you, Nathan said, turning to look at her properly in the fading light. I don't know what we would have done without you, Cass. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. You would have managed, perhaps not as easily, but you would have found a way. You're stronger than you think, Nathan. It was the first time she had used his given name, and something shifted between them in that moment, some small but significant boundary crossed. Still, he said, I am grateful, more than I can say. Cass smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and transformed her practical, no-nonsense features into something truly beautiful. As am I, for the chance to be here, to be needed. They sat together until full darkness descended, talking occasionally, but mostly just sharing the peace of the evening. When they finally rose to go inside, Nathan found himself reluctant to end the moment. Good night, Cass, he said as they reached the door to her small room. Good night, Nathan, she replied softly. Sleep well. That night, for the first time since Sarah's death, Nathan dreamed not of loss but of possibility. As summer progressed into fall, life at the Ambrose ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The babies grew stronger each day, their personalities beginning to emerge. Thomas, the more vocal and demanding, James quieter, but with a determined streak that reminded Nathan of his late wife. The toddlers thrived under Cass's care, learning new words daily and becoming increasingly independent. Nathan found himself watching Cass more and more the way she moved through the house with quiet efficiency. How she seemed to anticipate the children's needs before they expressed them, the gentle authority with which she managed their daily routines. She rarely spoke of her past beyond vague references to her family, and Nathan didn't press. Everyone in the West had stories they preferred to leave untold. In late September, as the aspens turned golden on the hillsides, Nathan took his cattle to market in Cheyenne. It was a successful trip, prices were good, and he returned with more money than he'd anticipated, enough to pay off some debts, set aside something for the winter, and still have a bit left over. He rode into the yard late one afternoon, tired from the long journey, but pleased with the outcome. The house looked different somehow. He noticed fresh curtains at the windows and a new coat of whitewash on the front porch. Flower boxes had appeared beneath the windows, filled with the last blooms of the season. Before he could dismount, the door flew open and the girls tumbled out, squealing with delight. "Pa! Pa, home!" they chanted in unison. Behind them came Cass, a baby on each hip, her face lighting up with a smile that made Nathan's heart beat faster. "Welcome home," she called. "We've been watching for you since yesterday." Nathan swung down from his horse and knelt to gather the toddlers into his arms. I missed you, little ones, he said, pressing kisses to their soft cheeks. Have you been good for Miss Cass? They've been angels, Cass assured him, descending the steps. All of them, even these two troublemakers. She nodded at the babies, who were watching their father with wide, curious eyes. Nathan rose and approached her, suddenly shy. They've grown so much in just a week. Children do that, Cass said with a smile. Turn your back for a moment, and they change before your eyes. Nathan reached out to touch James's cheek, then Thomas's. Thank you for caring for them so well. It's what I'm here for, Cass reminded him, but there was a softness in her voice that belied the practicality of her words. That evening, after the children were asleep, Nathan presented Cass with the gifts he'd purchased in Cheyenne, a fine wool shawl in deep blue, a small bottle of lavender water, and a book of poetry. You needn't have spent your money on me, she protested, but her fingers caressed the soft wool of the shawl with obvious pleasure. I wanted to, Nathan said simply. You've given us so much. This is just a small token of appreciation. Cass looked up at him, her eyes suspiciously bright. Thank you. They're lovely gifts. There's something else, Nathan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small envelope and handed it to her. Your wages plus a bonus. The cattle fetched a good price. Cass took the envelope but made no move to open it. This is generous of you. You've earned it, and more. Nathan hesitated, then pressed on. I was thinking, on the ride back, I don't want you to feel obligated to stay here if you have other plans. You mentioned when you came that you were deciding what comes next. If you want to move on, I would understand. A flash of something hurt, surprise, crossed Cass's face before she schooled her features into neutral politeness. Are you asking me to leave, Mr. Ambrose? The formal address stung. No, not at all. I don't want you to feel trapped here because of us, because of me. Cass was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on the shawl. I don't feel trapped, she said finally. I'm here because I choose to be. She met his eyes steadily. Unless you've changed your mind about needing help. I need you, Nathan said, more forcefully than he'd intended. We need you. The children adore you, and I... He trailed off, unsure how to express what he was feeling. And you, Cass prompted softly. I can't imagine this place without you now, he admitted. You've brought life back to this house, Cass. Light and warmth where there was only grief before. Something in her expression softened. Then I'll stay, Nathan, for as long as you want me to. The unspoken weight of those words hung between them. Nathan took a step toward her, drawn by something he couldn't name. Cass remained still, watching him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. The cry of one of the babies broke the moment. Cass stepped back, a flush spreading across her cheeks. I should check on him, she murmured. Of course, Nathan said, equally flustered. Good night, Cass. Good night, she replied, gathering her gifts and hurrying toward the children's room. Nathan remained by the hearth, staring into the flames and wondering what had just happened, and what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. As autumn deepened, bringing colder nights and shorter days, Nathan found himself creating excuses to spend more time in the house. There were always small repairs to be done, a loose floorboard here, a drafty window there. He built shelves for Cass's growing collection of preserves, fashioned a better cradle for the boys who were quickly outgrowing their first one, and constructed a small table and chairs for the girls to use for their meals and play. Cass accepted his increased presence with seeming equanimity, though sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. They developed a comfortable companionship, working together to care for the children and the home, their movements becoming synchronized, their communication often wordless but perfectly understood. In town, Nathan became aware of whispers and speculative glances whenever he and Cass appeared together with the children. Mrs. Wilson, Cass's aunt, made a point of stopping them after church one Sunday. You're looking well, Cassandra, she said, her sharp eyes moving between her niece and Nathan. The country air must agree with you. It does, Aunt Margaret, Cass replied politely. How have you been? Oh, managing, though it's quiet without you. Mrs. Wilson turned her attention to Nathan. Mr. Ambrose, I trust my niece is proving satisfactory as a helpmate? There was something loaded in the way she said helpmate that made Nathan uncomfortable. Miss Jacobson has been invaluable, he said stiffly. We're very fortunate that she was willing to assist us. Mrs. Wilson's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Indeed. Well, I won't keep you. The little ones must be eager for their nap. She nodded to them both and moved away, but not before giving Cass a significant look that Nathan couldn't interpret. Your aunt doesn't approve of your working for me, Nathan observed as they walked toward the wagon where the children waited with young Ethan. Cass sighed. Aunt Margaret has traditional views about what's proper for a woman in my position. And what position is that? Unmarried, past 25, and with limited prospects, Cass said dryly. She thinks I should be focusing on finding a husband, not raising another man's children. Nathan felt a twist of discomfort. I'm sorry if this arrangement has caused difficulties for you. Don't be, Cass said firmly. I make my own choices, Nathan. I always have. As they reached the wagon, Lucy held out her arms to Cass, who lifted her with practiced ease. Ma, the little girl said clearly, nestling against Cass's shoulder. A shocked silence fell over the adults. Lily, not to be outdone, immediately echoed her sister. Ma, Ma. Cass froze, her face pale. I never encouraged them to. I know, Nathan said quickly, seeing her distress. They're little. They don't understand. I would never try to replace their mother, Cass said, her voice low and urgent. You must believe that. I do, Nathan assured her, though the moment had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. They're just confused. We'll correct them gently. But over the following weeks, despite their best efforts, the toddlers persisted in calling Cass Ma. The more they tried to discourage it, the more determined the girls became. Eventually, Cass and Nathan exchanged a look of resignation over dinner one evening. Perhaps we should let it be for now, Cass suggested hesitantly. Forcing the issue seems to be making it worse. Nathan nodded slowly. They're too young to understand. And you are mothering them, Cass. In all the ways that matter. But Sarah will always be their mother, Nathan said firmly. Nothing changes that. But they need someone now, in the present. They need you. He paused, gathering his courage. We all do. Cass's eyes widened slightly at his words. Nathan. Whatever she might have said was lost as Thomas chose that moment to fling a spoonful of mashed potatoes across the table, prompting peals of laughter from his sisters and effectively ending the serious conversation. The first snow came early that year. A heavy November storm that blanketed the ranch in white and kept them housebound for 3 days. Confined together in the small house, Nathan and Cass developed new routines to keep the children entertained. They built forts from blankets in the main room, told stories by the fire, and Cass taught the girls simple games she remembered from her own childhood. On the second evening, after the children were asleep, Nathan brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and poured 2 small glasses. I'm not much of a drinker, Cass demurred when he offered her one. Neither am I, Nathan admitted, but it seems like the thing to do when you're snowed in, and I thought we might talk. Cass accepted the glass cautiously. Talk about what? Nathan took a sip of the whiskey, welcoming the burn as it went down. About what happens next, about the future. I see, Cass said, her expression carefully neutral. Have you been making plans? In a way. Nathan set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Cass, you've been here for nearly 6 months now. In that time, you've become essential to this family. To me. Cass looked down at her untouched whiskey. I'm glad I've been able to help. It's more than that, Nathan said, frustrated by his inability to express himself clearly. The children love you. The boys know your voice, your touch. The girls think of you as their mother, regardless of what we call you. And he trailed off, uncertain how to continue. And you? Cass prompted, echoing their conversation from months before. Nathan took a deep breath. I find myself thinking of you as more than just the woman who helps with my children, more than just an employee or even a friend. Cass's hand trembled slightly, causing the amber liquid in her glass to ripple. Nathan, I don't think— Please let me finish, he interrupted gently. I know it's too soon. I know there would be talk, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. And I hope that perhaps you might feel something too. Cass finally raised her eyes to his, and the vulnerability he saw there took his breath away. I came here to work, she said softly, to be useful. I never expected— Nor did I, Nathan assured her. But here we are. Here we are, she echoed. She took a small sip of the whiskey, grimaced slightly, and set the glass aside. What exactly are you proposing, Nathan? The directness of her question caught him off guard. I'm not— That is, I wouldn't presume. He stopped, gathered himself. I'm saying that I care for you, Cass, deeply, and I believe you care for me too. I'm asking if you might consider a future here, not as an employee, but as my wife. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Cass's face had gone very still, her eyes wide and unreadable. You don't need to answer now, Nathan hurried on. It's not a proper proposal. I know that. When the time is right, I'll do it properly. But I wanted you to know my intentions, to know that I see a future for us, if you want it too. Cass stood abruptly, moving to the window where frost patterns decorated the glass. You're still grieving, Nathan. Yes, he admitted. I will always mourn Sarah. But that doesn't mean I can't also love again, that I don't already. Don't, Cass said quickly, turning back to face him. Please don't say it, not yet. Her expression softened at whatever she saw in his face. I'm not refusing you, Nathan. I'm just asking for time. This is unexpected. Nathan nodded, hope and disappointment warring within him. Of course, all the time you need. Cass gave him a small, tremulous smile. Thank you. And now, if you don't mind, I think I'll retire. It's been a long day. Good night, Cass, Nathan said, watching as she moved toward her room. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. I do care for you, Nathan, and for the children. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise. Before he could respond, she was gone, the soft click of her door the only evidence of her passing. The snow melted 3 days later, leaving the world outside transformed, familiar landmarks made new under their white coating. Nathan threw himself into the outdoor work that had accumulated during the storm, grateful for the physical exertion that left him too exhausted to dwell on the uncertainty of his situation with Cass. For her part, Cass maintained the same calm efficiency she always had, caring for the children, managing the household, preparing meals. If there was a new wariness in her manner when she and Nathan were alone, neither of them acknowledged it. December arrived with more snow and preparations for Christmas. Cass baked special treats, sewed new clothes for the children from fabric Nathan had brought from Cheyenne, and decorated the house with pine boughs and red berries. Nathan cut a small tree from the hillside and set it up in the corner of the main room, much to the delight of the girls who helped hang the simple ornaments Cass had fashioned. The holidays brought a temporary truce to the unspoken tension between them. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire after the children were asleep, drinking cider and watching the flames. I have something for you, Nathan said, reaching beneath the tree for a small package wrapped in brown paper. I thought you might like to open it tonight without the chaos of tomorrow. Cass accepted the package with a smile. You've already given us so much, the new fabrics, the toys for the children. This is just for you, Nathan said. Cass carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of wildflowers. She traced the design with her fingertips. It's beautiful. Open it, Nathan encouraged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Cass lifted it out, her breath catching as she opened it to find a tiny likeness of the 4 children, somehow captured by a photographer Nathan must have taken them to see on one of his trips to town. "Nathan," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "This is too much." "It's not enough," he said quietly. "Not nearly enough for what you've given us." Cass closed the locket and held it to her heart for a moment before carefully fastening it around her neck. "I'll treasure it always." "I have something for you too," she said, rising and going to her room. She returned with a package larger than his had been, neatly wrapped in cloth. Nathan unwrapped it to find a quilt, clearly handmade, in a pattern of blues and browns that reminded him of the Wyoming sky and earth. "When did you find time to make this?" he asked in wonder, running his hand over the precise stitching. "I worked on it at night after everyone was asleep," Cass admitted. "It helped me think." "About what?" She met his eyes steadily. "About what I want. About where I belong." Nathan's heart quickened. "And have you decided?" Cass nodded slowly. "I have. But not tonight, Nathan. Tonight is for Christmas and for the children. Tomorrow is soon enough for other conversations." He accepted her gentle deflection, knowing she was right. "Merry Christmas, Cass." "Merry Christmas, Nathan." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. The children woke early. Excited by the small gifts that had appeared, overnight wooden animals Nathan had carved for the boys, dolls with cloth bodies and painted faces for the girls, candies and oranges for all. Cass prepared a special breakfast, and they spent the morning in a haze of happiness and gratitude. In the afternoon, as the babies napped and the girls played quietly with their new toys, Cass approached Nathan where he sat by the window. "I'm ready to talk now," she said simply. Nathan nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. "Shall we go outside? Just for a few minutes?" They bundled up against the cold and stepped onto the porch. The world was still and white, the winter sun casting long shadows across the untouched snow of the yard. "I've been thinking about what you said," Cass began, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "About intentions and the future." Nathan waited, afraid to hope, afraid to speak and break whatever spell had brought them to this moment. "When I came here," Cass continued, "I was running away from something, from a mistake I'd made, a trust misplaced. I thought I was just looking for somewhere to hide, to lick my wounds and decide what to do next." She turned to face him fully. "I never expected to find a home, a family." "Is that what we are to you?" Nathan asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Family?" "Yes," Cass said simply. "More than I ever thought I'd have again." She reached up to touch the locket at her throat. "I love them, Nathan. Your children. As if they were my own." "And me?" he asked, barely daring to breathe. Cass's eyes, clear and honest, met his. "And you. Despite all my resolutions to be practical, to keep my heart guarded, I find myself loving you too." Nathan reached for her hands, holding them tightly in his own. "Then say yes, Cass. Say you'll stay, not as our helper, but as my wife, as our children's mother in truth." "There will be talk," she warned, but she didn't pull away. "It hasn't been a full year since Sarah." "I know," Nathan acknowledged, "and I will always honor her memory. But she would want the children to be loved, to have a mother. She would want me to find happiness again." Cass was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said quietly, then more firmly. "Yes, Nathan. I will marry you." Joy surged through him, bright and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for the bread, for the children, for everything." Cass laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "I think the bread was the least of it." "No," Nathan said, drawing back to look into her eyes. "It was the beginning. You walked into our lives with that loaf of bread, and nothing has been the same since." He lowered his head and kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, her arms tightening around him. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and smiling. "Shall we tell the girls?" Cass asked. "They already know you're their ma," Nathan reminded her with a smile. "We'll just be making it official." They married in the new year, A small ceremony in the church in Bentonville with only a few witnesses. Mrs. Wilson, looking both proud and slightly vindicated, the pastor and his wife, young Ethan and his parents, and a handful of neighbors who had come to accept Cass as an integral part of the Ambrose family. The children attended too, of course the girls as impromptu flower bearers, scattering petals haphazardly down the aisle, and the boys in new outfits Cass had sewn, held by Ethan and his mother during the brief service. There was talk, as they had known there would be. Some thought it too soon after Sarah's passing. Others whispered that perhaps there had been more between Nathan and Cass than either let on, even before the wedding. But such gossip faded quickly in the face of their obvious devotion to each other and to the children, and by spring their union was accepted as natural and right by all but the most determined busybodies. Life settled into new patterns. Cass moved from her small room off the kitchen to share Nathan's bed. The children thrived under their joint care, the boys beginning to crawl and babble, the girls growing more independent and adventurous by the day. Nathan expanded the garden Cass had started, added new livestock, and began to think about enlarging the house as the family's needs grew. In May, just over a year since Cass had first appeared at their door with a loaf of bread, she and Nathan sat on the porch after putting the children to bed, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar hues of orange and pink. "I have news," Cass said softly, her hand finding his in the gathering dusk. Nathan turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope." "I believe so." She guided his hand to rest against her stomach. "We're going to need that larger bedroom sooner than we thought." For a moment Nathan couldn't speak, overcome by a surge of emotions too complex to name. Joy, certainly, and gratitude, but also a brief, sharp pang of remembrance Sarah, and the children she had given him, and the price she had paid. Cass, ever attuned to his mood, squeezed his hand. "Are you happy?" Nathan nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "Beyond words, but also a little afraid." "Because of what happened with Sarah," Cass said, not a question but an understanding. "Yes. I couldn't bear to lose you too." Cass leaned her head against his shoulder. "Life offers no guarantees, Nathan. We both know that. But I'm strong and healthy, and the doctor in Cheyenne says there's no reason to expect complications." "You've seen the doctor already?" She nodded. "Last week when I went with Mrs. Peterson, I wanted to be sure before I told you." Nathan wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "Another child. Our child." "The first of our own," Cass agreed, "though no more loved than the 4 we already have." Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Of course not, but still a miracle." They sat together as darkness fell, planning and dreaming. The house would need expansion, perhaps 2 new bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch was doing well, with prospects for continued growth. The children were happy and healthy. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nathan asked as they finally rose to go inside. "That day when you came to our door with bread?" Cass smiled, her face luminous in the soft light spilling from the window. "Never. I was just hoping to be useful, to find a place where I could heal." "And instead?" "Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted." She laid her hand over her still flat stomach. "A husband who loves me, children to cherish, a child of my own on the way, a home." Nathan drew her to him for a lingering kiss. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, "for saving us, for bringing life back to this house." "We saved each other," Cass corrected gently, "and that's the greatest gift of all." Their daughter was born in December, on a night when snow fell softly outside the bedroom window and a fire blazed in the hearth. She came into the world with a lusty cry that made Nathan laugh through his tears of joy and relief. Cass, exhausted but radiant, held out her arms for the swaddled infant. "She's perfect," Nathan said, sitting beside them on the bed. "Just like her mother." Cass smiled up at him, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed names but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his wife and new daughter, Nathan knew. "Hope," he said, "because that's what you brought us, Cass, from the moment you walked through our door." Hope, Cass repeated, testing the name. Yes, I like that. Hope Sarah Ambrose. Nathan's eyes widened in surprise. You want to give her Sarah's name? She's part of our family's story, Cass said simply. Part of what brought us together. I think it's right to honor her memory this way. Nathan bent to kiss her, overwhelmed by the depth of his love for this woman who had healed his broken family and his wounded heart. I love you, Cassandra Ambrose. More than I can ever say. You don't need to say it, Cass replied, shifting the baby so he could see her tiny, perfect face. You show me every day. In the days that followed, the older children were introduced to their new sister with varying degrees of interest and understanding. The boys, now toddling about on unsteady legs, regarded the baby with curious pokes and dubious expressions. The girls, nearly 4 years old and feeling very grown up, were eager to help, bringing diapers and blankets with solemn importance. Gentle, Lily, Cass instructed, as the more exuberant twin patted the baby's head with rather more force than necessary. Baby sister, Lucy said softly, her expression thoughtful as she leaned against Cass's knee. That's right, sweetheart, Nathan confirmed, lifting her onto his lap. This is Hope, your baby sister. Our family is complete now, Lily declared with the confidence of childhood. Nathan and Cass exchanged a smile over the children's heads. Perhaps their family was complete, or perhaps the future held more children, more joy, more challenges to face together. Whatever came, they would meet it as they had met everything since that fateful day, with love, courage, and the unshakable bond forged between them when a grieving cowboy opened his door to find a woman with a loaf of bread and a heart ready to love. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all years do. The ranch prospered, and the house grew to accommodate the expanding family. Hope was joined by a brother, Michael, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Elizabeth. The older children grew tall and strong, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas with his father's quiet determination, James with his mother's practical nature, Lucy with her artistic soul, and Lily with her boundless energy and curiosity. There were difficult times, of course, droughts that threatened the cattle, a fire that destroyed the barn one summer, quickly rebuilt by neighbors who rallied around the Ambrose family, illnesses that left parents anxious and sleepless. But through it all, Nathan and Cass remained steadfast in their love for each other and their children. On the 10th anniversary of the day Cass had first come to their door, Nathan presented her with a special gift, a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Cheyenne, depicting their home as it had been that day, with Cass standing on the porch, a loaf of bread in her hands. To remind us, he said as she admired it through tears, of how the simplest acts of kindness can change everything. As if I could ever forget, Cass replied, reaching up to touch the locket she still wore daily, now containing images of all 7 children. That evening, after the younger ones were in bed and the older children engaged in quiet activities, Nathan and Cass sat on the expanded porch of their home, watching the familiar sunset colors paint the Wyoming sky. Any regrets? Nathan asked, taking her hand in his. Cass shook her head, smiling at the man who had become the center of her world. Not a single one. Every step of my path led me here, to you, to our children, to this life we've built together. How could I regret any of it? Nathan raised her hand to his lips, kissing it with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. I thank God every day for the twist of fate that brought you to our door, for the bread that fed our bodies and the love that healed our souls. And I thank God for a stubborn cowboy who let me in, Cass replied softly, who trusted me with his children and eventually with his heart. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they sat together in the peaceful silence of deep contentment, surrounded by the life they had created from grief and hope, from need and giving, from a simple loaf of bread and the extraordinary love that had grown from that humble beginning.